Hello, everyone. Welcome to DevFest Inspire. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Viat, and I'm joining you all the way from Moscow, Russia. And today, together with Ada, we're going to be hosting this amazing session. Hey, Ada.
Hello, Sviat, and I'm happy to be on the session as well.
Thank you. Yeah, excited about the session. And our speaker today, is Maxim Salnikov. Maxim Salnikov is an Oslo-based cloud and tech community geek. He is a web dev maestro who builds apps since the end of the last century and shares his extensive web platform experience by speaking and training at developer events around the world. Daytime, Maxim is boosting cloud skills at the country scale by leading developer engagement in Microsoft Norway. In the evenings, you'll find him organizing the country's main web and mobile meetups and two full-scale tech conferences. Maxim, welcome on stage.
Hello, Zviad, hello, Ada, and
Hi, Maxim.
hello,
Welcome.
dear attendees.
Cool. So thank you for joining us today, Maxim. The stage is yours.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for the intro. Let's talk today about native web apps. Are we there yet? Are we ready for them? Are web apps ready for us? Let's try to answer a few questions. First, what really makes what really creates the native feeling of the web application, or let's say any generic application? How do we understand that this application was created particularly for this platform, for this device, for this operating system? And also, since this is a web track of the DevFest Inspire, let's check what's available currently, what's available today, and what will be available tomorrow, maybe day after tomorrow, for the web applications, web front-end applications to be precise. Zviat already introduced me, so just super briefly, I stream directly from Oslo, capital of Norway. I'm a big fan of progressive web applications. You'll find me organizing meetups and conferences on that topic, and I'm a big fan of developer communities. So I run multiple ones here in Oslo where I live. Also, I'm Google developer expert in Angular and web technologies for quite a few years. Let's stay connected, folks. My Twitter is webmaxru. I tweet mainly about the same topic: progressive web applications, modern web front-end development, and all things around that. Before we dive deeper into nativeness, let's briefly list what makes web in general a great platform for building, distributing, hosting, and using applications. First, we have evergreen browsers, so we don't have to care about a particular version of, let's say, Chromium engine that drives either Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge for us, and what's more important for our visitors, for our customers, clients. And to be honest, I didn't check for a while which version do I run now, because it's evergreen, and using progressive enhancement with feature detection as a driving mechanism for this concept, we are pretty safe in using the latest and greatest technologies. Then JavaScript is a language that powers majority of web applications, and yeah, I just a reminder that by saying web applications, I mean web front-end apps. Maybe this statement is a bit outdated, because in addition to JavaScript as a native language, we have now a bunch of programming language available for native web experience as a part of WebAssembly. And it opened doors for backend developers to build front-end apps, right? Plus, we have amazing JavaScript engines. These programs where we run our programs, and their developers put lots of efforts into making them as performant as possible. It gives us a little possibility to maybe have our own code is not that perfect, right? But let's make sure that we write really optimized code ourselves. Tooling, I believe it's best in class for JavaScript. All these IDEs, installable ones, cloud ones, all this IntelliSense, all this bunch of framework libraries. I believe it's pure pleasure to build web frontend apps these days. And after all, we are a huge community. Millions of JavaScript developers. So you can find the answer on pretty much any question about your dev experience. Yeah, it's also a really nice place to be. There are some disadvantages. Historically, web is very dependent on being connected to internet. I mean, web applications that we and our users run on their devices. Once connection is lost, well, many nasty things could happen. And luckily now we have Service Worker API that can mitigate these offline consequences and maybe jumping online offline consequences. But my today's topic is about dealing with another disadvantage, also historical ones, the fact that web is somehow limited with the browser. So of course, all these web applications, web pages, they run inside the browsers, but they can do more these days. And I'll try to convince you in that fact. Back to 2015, where term progressive web apps was invented by Alex Russell in this article, and it was exactly about that: how to escape browser tab without losing nature of web. Its openness, its discoverability, its linkability, all these advantages that no other programming platform has. Fast forward to our days. I had great pleasure to take part in compiling chapter dedicated to progressive web apps of Web Almanac. So we released this report just a few days ago, and it says that currently around, actually more than 3% of web addresses are driven by service workers, controlled by service workers. And these 3% of websites control around 1/5 of traffic. Just imagine, it's quite large number, and it's constantly growing. But it's about service workers, right? So it gives us at least some understanding how popular this idea is. It gives you maybe some inspiration to invest your time, efforts into learning and building that kind of applications. Closer to the topic, installable websites. My friend Maximiliano did some research, and he came with this number: around 1.5 million websites are installable these days. That's quite a few, right? Go to the comparison: native code versus web. So native applications versus web. There is always this kind of battle, right? Kind of argument between these two technologies, where to go. Of course, if we have to access first nativeness and the horizontal one is rich, well, obviously by nativeness, and by nativeness I mean number and depth of integrations of this particular application you build and its environment. In the broad definition, it's operating system, hardware, like everything. Then, of course, web is all about reach. Web is everywhere, as I already mentioned. It's open, linkable, discoverable. Then, if we try to put progressive web apps on this chart, well, it tries to take the best from these two worlds. And let's check what's available on web, web front-end platform, to make our applications as native as possible. So let's list briefly categories. And so I found lots of potential integration points, how to really make your app feel like native. And I grouped them into a few categories. It all starts with installation, right? In case of web, it all starts a bit earlier when you search for a particular application, maybe using some search engine, but then you have a chance to install this if it's properly created progressive web application, and multiple ways to run it. Then after all, we talk about web front-end part. That means it has some user interface. So it's super important how that really looks, how well that plays with, let's say, a desktop or home screen, all things about this wrapping of your application or windowing. Then bunch of integrations that I called outbound, that when we want to use this or that feature of operating system from our application. Vice versa, inbound integrations, it's when operating system wants something special from our app. Maybe some special way to start it, maybe some special way to use particular features. You'll understand what I mean a bit later. Then notifications, and we definitely want to have integration with a native engine of notifications for this or that particular operating system. And of course, if we talk about more or less complex application, most likely we will need some tasks to run in background, either some heavy calculations or maybe something scheduled or maybe something related with particular events that are completely detached from life cycle of the application itself. Then we need support of running background tasks. Not even saying about access to hardware. The modern devices equipped with enormous number of interesting possibilities, media capabilities, bunch of sensors, and why not to use it directly from the code we write as a web front-end application. Okay, ready to go? Fasten your seatbelts. We work with cutting edge of the technology. So to test all the features I want to introduce, or like some of the features, I encourage you to enable some flags in your browser. So this is example for Edge. If you instead of Edge type Chrome, you will get the same dialog for Google Chrome. Find everything related to PWA and turn everything on. I intentionally do not say which features are in production, which are under flag, which are in origin trial mode, just because it might be outdated right after the end of my session, right? There is no even a reason to check the current status because it's changing so rapidly. Of course, it's changing for having more and more features in production. Okay, now we're ready. Installation and run. How to install your web application. What are the criteria? Currently, two main things. You have to have properly created web app manifest, number one, and you have to have service worker correctly written with at least fetch event. So browser does its best guess that this website is offline ready, so there is some reason to have it installable. If you qualify these two criteria, users will get corresponding icon or menu item in their browsers, and it looks very differently for the different browsers, different operating systems, different platforms. Then it can be installed. And here you see sample of web manifest. I call this file site.webmanifest. What I notice now, still maybe 99% of these web app manifests have .json extension. It's okay, it works, but current specification says that it's better to use .webmanifest extension just to give some extra context to the browser. But of course, under the hood, this is JSON formatted file. And you see on my sample, it contains some core features that you need to have your application installed, at least name and at least set of icons. This is how we can start reasoning about some web experience as a web application. Then, after user discover this install icon or menu item, they will get a dialog like this. And again, this is just a sample for Microsoft Edge on Windows 10 operating system. This dialog could be different for different browsers, different operating systems, different devices. But the point is, this dialog is native, so it looks native for this particular environment. Then you might be asked for some extra parameters for about your installed application. And after all, on Windows 10, it ends up in general apps and features dialog, so you can you can uninstall, you can tune some parameters of your application exactly like you have for the native one. So some features are available for you to configure. Then, what about shortcuts? These things when we can start application in particular mode by right-clicking and getting some context menu. Yes, it's possible. It's again, you can set up this in your web app manifest. We'll refer to this file many times in this session. So yeah, just provide name for the action. You can provide specific icon for this, and of course point to a particular part of your web application, and then your users will get experience like this when they right click shortcut of your app. And launch mode, we also can fine-tune this behavior. For example, if the window with your web application already open, what happens if user double clicks the icon or tap icon if we talk about mobile device? Again, multiple options. So we can either ignore the fact that we have already one instance of application running, right? Or we can redirect user to existing window. And then what happens next? We can also decide as developers, do we immediately restart this like application in this particular window, this instance, or we kind of put it into the queue, and all corresponding APIs are available for us. So we can, for example, postpone this action, defer this action, ignore this action, completely up to our business scenario. These are different modes of installation and run. What about windowing? What about this UI representation of our application? Well, also some points we can fine-tune for the application using, again, Web App Manifest. First, we have two options for playing with different Windows modes, display and display override. The second one is for more modern browsers that can support, let's say, newer set of the modes, including window control overlay. And this is where another feature comes to the game. We can put some pieces of UI of our application straight to title bar of the window. That this way we can use 100% of available space dedicated for our application using this. Let me go back to the previous slide. Window control overlay mode. Nice. And how do we position our UI controls? Well, we have CSS variables available to us, and we have corresponding JavaScript API. Well, it's maybe not the trivial, right? But we have ways to precisely position what we want to position in title bar. Also, we can even organize native tabs in our application. The corresponding display mode called tab. And why is this feature available? Because why to create our own tabs for tabbed UI, if this is the case for our application, if we can use native ones from the browsers? So why to reproduce these tabs using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, when we can rely on the native controls? And this will be native part of the application. You can enable this mode in the corresponding dialog, but what I can tell you, it doesn't work good for now. So my experiments show that some text intersections. So this could be better. I mean, I believe this is early beta or alpha of this concept. But again, I did this experiment a few days ago. Maybe now it's completely production ready. I encourage you to try. We move on. Outbound integrations. WebShare API. This is quite mature API. It's with us for a few years, and it's in production in all evergreen browsers. And it's about one simple thing: calling native dialog to share some link with possible targets. For example, Twitter, Facebook, your mail client, your messaging client, what available on this particular device for this particular user. Corresponding JavaScript API is available for us. Sorry. And as a result, when you call this dialog, you will get native one. So we don't care how that looks. It looks differently on different operating systems. We just can get status. Was this shared successfully or not? Similar idea for picking contacts from the device address book. corresponding API is available for us, and it will look something like that. Again, the exact view of dialog window depends on particular operating system, and we don't care how that looks. It looks native for the operating system, and this is our goal, right? To use native features of environment from our web front-end application. And the most exciting part of outbound integrations for myself is access to file system. This is the freshest API from that list, and it gives us possibility to read, write files on operating system on this particular device straight from our JavaScript code without any intermediate layer. As I mentioned, read and write access is available, of course, taking into account all possible privacy and security considerations. Inbound integrations, very briefly. First, we can call our application by particular freshly registered protocol. Sounds really exciting. So again, back to our famous web app manifest file, we can go and register whole protocol for our application. And just imagine, instead of writing HTTP or HTTPS, you write something for yourself, and you can use this link, for example, in some external applications. So this is really an interesting possibility, and only native apps had chance to register protocols before. Now we can do the same for the web. Or declarative link capturing. So this feature answers on the question, what happens after user types in URL, which is that belongs to your progressive web applications, which is actually an origin of your application. And again, quite similar to run mode, we can either redirect to existing tab if it's available, if there is tab with our application running already, or we can ignore this and open new client. With URL handlers, we extend this idea for third-party origins when, for example, we can open our web application not only from our origin, but from, let's say, our partner's website. Of course, not to hijack URLs, not to give chance to hijack URLs to bad actors. Full support from this third-party hostname required. So they have to host web app origin association file there just to let environment browser know that, yes, okay, you can give control to this third-party progressive web application instead of our URL or particular set of URLs. Or a bit simpler concept, you can register association of file extensions for installed progressive web apps. And in my sample that you see on your screens, I registered MP3 file extension for my installed progressive web app. So now users double-click any MP3 file, and they see not any kind of native player or audio editor, but my application started. And as a developer, I have control over what parameters I receive on this start. So, for example, if multiple files were selected before starting them, I will get array of these file names, and I can decide as developer what to do with this data. And similar to share API, we have share target. This is the place where we register our progressive web app as a target for this native sharing dialog. Again, it all starts with web app manifest, and then in the code, we can receive all the data that was shared with our application. What to do next, we decide, we developers. So maybe hit some API endpoints to post this link, title, and description that was shared with our application. But that's really interesting. So just imagine you have your personal progressive web app listed as a target share. So like Twitter, Facebook, and your famous app. Isn't that cool? Next, notifications. Super briefly, Web Push API is quite mature API. What I can only tell here is there are some very visible signs that soon this will be implemented in iOS. So web push notifications comes to Apple devices. but it's a secret. I mean, no official information, but there are corresponding commits on WebKit repo. I think this is a good sign. Badging, next thing that makes our web front-end application closer to the native ones. It's the possibility to delight or maybe annoy users by a number of, for example, unread messages over the icon of installed web applications. Also, something that we know well as users of native mobile apps, we can do the same for web applications now. Notification triggers is the way to schedule some notifications for the future time, and this way we do not depend on connection status. Notification triggers is available as a background tasks, and there are a bunch of extra APIs that you can use to run some tasks in the background. For example, to let's say outsource some heavy calculations, or maybe to schedule something in advance, or to react on some events. Here, I just want to emphasize awesome tools available for us in DevTools of Chromium-based browsers to debug and test this background functionality, where we can record events that comes to our service worker. Dozens of APIs available for direct access to hardware from our JavaScript code. And you may have a question, where to follow all this latest and greatest stuff? Project Fugu Tracker is solution is my answer. Just open this URL, and by the way, I will share this in a special chat. I will share URL to these slides in a special chat where I will stay for a while to answer your questions. Couple more useful URLs. All latest and greatest things that come to Web App Manifest specification, and how to use origin trials. So, native web app, are we there? Are they here? I ask you to answer this question. I just remind you list of integrations I created for you. On that, thank you very much. I appreciate your questions.
Thank you very much, Maxim. Very interesting talk. I think you did an amazing overview of where we are. We actually have one question on one of the platforms. How is the general acceptance of progressive web apps among modern browsers? I think it's one of the questions that you've been asked a lot of times.
Oh yes, oh yes. And I remember a few years ago, I had kind of table of compatibility. This API, these browsers. Now I don't do this because evergreen browsers is the answer. We most likely will never get to the point where everything is available everywhere. Just architect your applications with progressive enhancement in mind, and think about all these cool features I introduced, like about something that might happen or might not. And if in worst case, if these features are not available, you have to just provide at least core functionality of your app without, ruining user experience, without too many red lines in console. But in a big picture, very big picture, this level of adoption is steadily growing.
Yes, yes. Okay, once again, thank you very much for an amazing talk. Maxim will be joining us on the spatial chat. So if you have any questions on the progressive web apps, also join us on a spatial chat. On that note, I would love to ask you to give us a feedback on a DevFest Inspire by going to the link you see on the screen. It's bit.ly devfest-inspire-feedback. Our next session will be on a Fitbit. And after the session, we will also have a closing ceremony. Join us for that. Thank you very much, and see you on the next session.
Thank you, folks. Bye.